people want to know. Jimmie Holman is the CEO of Pulse Technologies Research, LLC, which is based in Dallas, Texas, and COO of Bioenergetics and Pulse Technologies, SRL, which is in the European Union, Bucharest, Romania. Mr. Holman has been exclusively involved since approximately 1969 in proprietary research and development in many areas of highly technical design, including electronic warfare, electronic surveillance, signal intelligence, exotic signal processing, advanced supercomputer development, and specialized studies for both domestic and foreign governments and agencies. So Mr. Holman has been extensively researching resonant frequency technology since 1995 with intense focus on the positive effects and natural responses of a biological nature for personal, environmental, medical, commercial, and industrial applications. Although Mr. Holman is based in Dallas, Texas, much of the proprietary work of Pulse Technologies is being securely carried out abroad, specifically in Eastern Europe. Very interesting background. Quite
that
qualified.
That was great. No mistakes even.
Jimmie.
Thank you, Susan.
Yo, you're more than welcome. Okay, and then our other guest is Jordan DeJonge, is a pulsed technology consultant, end user and trainer, a Zyto elite operator working out of the Bourne Clinic in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So Jordan left college to work with Omnimed in 2004, which included a stint as a trainer and trade show operator. In 2009, Jordan welcomed Zyto into the picture, and in 2010, Pulse Technologies came into the picture. The idea is that a biofeedback device with an imprinter could be used to cross-access different devices for their bioresonance, and a frequency library began to be built. Old methods were applied to new machines, and then a new way of deriving frequencies came into play with advanced harmonic frequency calculators. Jordan's been exposing many various conditions to the bioresonance and pulse fields with documentation. The positive biofeedback has exposed him to some of the greatest minds in the field, and the remote capabilities of the Zyto and the reach of YouTube have expanded the clients to include a few other states and other countries. Very impressive, Jordan. Thank you for being with us. And before,
thank you for having me.
We love it. And before we actually get started, because we're going to start with Jimmie Holman, what I want you to know is that when you realize the extent of the electrical human processes, which are not limited to the systemic body, but are also encompassing virtually every metabolic and chemical process, only then will you appreciate the virtually unlimited possibilities available via the use of non-invasive, direct or radiant application of natural energies and signals to bring about the desired results. We've got a wonderful evening. So, Jimmie, would you please start?
Yeah, let's start with the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, for everybody involved, if depending on your level of interest, we have put a lot of information specifically for the seminar up at on my private server at holman.net/pub/quantumlife. This entire presentation is there. in many things, there's some video that we will kind of pass up in these slides because it's not really viewable in this format, but it's there, and we will discuss that when we get to it. But besides this presentation, at the first URL, the Pulse Tech Research website, there's a lot of articles, just a wealth of information, absolutely nothing on that website to sell. When I got into this and was looking for information, it was pretty grim what I found from a technical perspective. And there's nothing magic to any of this. It's hard science, hard physics. It's just not what we've been taught. And this kind of guides us through a lot of that. But feel free to download and grab anything on that website. And the copyrights are all done for free sharing. We try to put the open copyright for reprinting and all that right on the documents. Next slide. We deal with a lot of practitioners. Mostly we deal with our practitioners. And out of all the practitioners that we deal with, it probably should not be so surprising that the one person with the least medical credentials is one of the best persons we found out there, and that just happens to be Jordy. He is very passionate. He does all the things that we as a manufacturer can't do. We can't treat people. It's just not what we do. We rely on the medical and alternative community to pass this information along and to utilize it. And working with them, they've got innovative ways of doing things that we've never even considered. But passing that along is probably my karma for all the things that I used to do long ago. Jordy, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, no, I mean, when I saw Jimmie's research that he did with Candida, I knew I had to have a device that had some published literature, showing that resonant frequencies did do something, and that they also had their own specific calculations for frequencies, as opposed to what's so publicly out there. And they filtered through, what is publicly available, and demonstrated, the efficacy versus their own rates, and it showed profound results. And I thought if I could just get that stuff into the Zyto, I could start assessing different machines' frequency outputs linearly to see what would be most likely to help people.
And,
yeah,
by
I'm
the
just
way,
grateful for.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And I'm grateful for them for making machines and continuing to improve those machines that they've made over the years. There's been fantastic advances since I've worked with their equipment. Each one's better than the last, even though sometimes they carry the same names. It makes my job a lot easier.
That article that is showing up on your screen right there is probably not at that. I don't know if it's that address or the other one, but that article is specifically on Jordy. It was one that was done by writer Justin Allen, and it's specifically about the work that Jordy has been doing. And that second page is within that. It's a list of the the YouTube URLs that are excellent. Let's get on to the next slide. What's the difference between this and this? Does anybody know right offhand? It's probably a good time for the next slide. It's largely this, because using electromedicine, this largely goes away. When I got into this, next slide, I quickly learned that the difference was frequency. That was the magic thing. When I went out on the websites when I had problems, I thought this was pure nonsense. Next slide. In fact, everything that is from this point on came from as my enlightenment, for lack of a better word, because I'd been in 2 car wrecks. Next slide. And I had been in 2 car wrecks. It was very unfortunate, and I was not doing well even after a year of treatment. And there is actually an article, we won't get into it now, but conventional treatment failed me miserably. It provided a quality of life that I didn't feel like was worth living. Next slide. But what I found was something that was very impressive to me from a technical aspect, but it is not conventional medicine. Conventional medicine had failed me, but it was common sense, as are most of the protocols nowadays. Next slide. And it basically was a matter of putting all kinds of puzzle pieces together. And next slide, and then the next one. I had to go back to the very beginning, and I found out that electromedicine has been back with us since early man, even 9000 BC. We have evidence of bracelets and magnetic lodestones being worn for healthful intentions. Then there's all kinds of reasons we know that. But even onto the next thing. Whoops, passed one up. There, no. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. When we get into the more modern times, but even in the 2 centuries ago or so, Galvani, he was the first person that realized the electric nature. But we do have good scientists in the last several hundred years that are really bringing this more and more to light. Next slide. There is a video, a 5-minute video that goes through a lot of that very quickly, but we're going to have to do it in slides here. Michael Faraday and Maxwell, the mathematician, they actually formed the basis of all the formulas for virtually all science of the 20th century. All of Maxwell's equations weren't published, and as a result, they didn't publish them because they didn't understand them. Well, it turns out those formulas actually are the basis of quantum mechanics and will be the science of the 21st century. Let's go on to the next slide. I know of everybody knew of the frog leg experiments, that everybody did that in school, I'm sure, where you used electric current to make a muscle jump, typically a frog leg. Well, it was Galvani was the one that did that. But what was really significant, but has not been reported, is that he was making it do it from a distance. That is significant. We'll go to next slide, Royal Rife. This is the guy that really put a lot of the pieces together. And I'm hoping most of y'all are familiar with Rife. I've put most of his documents, video, lots of stuff up free on the Pulse Tech research website as part of the Electric Human. Next slide. It was Rife's, he had developed a really high-resolution microscope. Nothing was like it during its time. This is a picture of the only one ever built, but he was able to see down at the virus level and see and photograph in real time. Electron microscopes won't even do that still today. They kill the pathogen as soon as the electron beam goes on. Next slide. But because of this, Rife would do certain things. He would take a breast tumor, he would isolate the virus from it. Next slide. And this little device in the background was his frequency generator, which we now have something that we can hold in our hand. Next slide. He would expose those things to he would expose the thing to the slide. If you look in this picture, right above his head is the plasma tube. And he would expose it to the various frequencies. And in his case, it was try and miss until he finally got it, which was a lot of trial and error. Next slide. But he would see it going from a glowing purple color to a dead black when it died. Next slide. Nikola Tesla is probably my biggest inspiration because he was the one that realized there was another type of wave, conventional wave. If you go to the next slide. I promise this won't get too technical. We're just about to get over that, I hope. If you look in this top diagram, you see a wave moving like in the wave up and down like you normally think of a wave. The wave that he was talking about moved a completely different way. It moved forward and backwards, or if you were to look at this second one, they would be moving left to right, vibrating back, left to right, left to right, left to right, back and forth like that. And next slide. He was fanatically obsessed with the transmission of power, which was probably his downfall, because he wanted to transmit power out to the houses and businesses for free. But it was based on frequency. But he could do it from the power generation plant out to the houses. Next slide. But what we're basically doing is the same thing, using the same type of wave, but transmitting out instead of specific houses to specific cells. Again, based on frequency. Next slide. I know everybody has witnessed a radio on in the room and you flip on a light switch and you hear a pop on the radio. I can see you shaking your heads yes right now. That click was transmitted out when that when the power switch closed. There was a little spark that occurred. That was actually a plasma. I'm not going to what a plasma is, but it's the next state of matter after gas. That plasma emitted a wave. Actually, it's a longitudinal wave like we showed in that second diagram, but the radio received it. What we are actually doing is flipping that light switch off and on very, very fast. Up to about so far we're up to about 980,000 times per second. Next slide. You will often hear this referred to as scalar wave. The guy in the middle here is Dr. Konstantin Meil. He's a professor of power engineering over in Germany. Probably the foremost authority on scalar waves. We just had a conference in Lyon, France about this, and if you look at his equipment on the lower right, that is like the two Tesla Wardenclyffes. He's literally transmitting power from one to the other one. And what is going on, in our plasma tube on the left, we're doing almost the same thing. But this is sort of a stress wave. It's not a conventional electromagnetic wave. You won't be tested on this. But he has actually done, next slide, all the mathematics. It all works out. It all exists, and it's pretty remarkable. But Tesla was absolutely right. Next slide. We go back to about the 1920s, and this type of wave and this type of communication that's going on between cells. In this case, there was a Russian named Gurvich. He would, in what was labeled as the test culture here, he would put a culture, and he would put portions of the culture in these other two petri dishes, and he would separate them via leaded glass or quartz glass. But he could kill the stuff in the test culture, and the one in the quartz glass would also die. There was a communication from the cells being given off to kill the pathogens in the remote culture. They would have done it also in the other culture if they not been protected by the leaded glass. The leaded glass does not pass light in certain wavelengths, certain purpley wavelengths, which happen to be the range that Rife was working in. Next slide. It turns out that all cells give off light, and they're actually connected a very strange way. Dr. Fitzalbert Propp was the first person to actually record that all cells give off light. They were actually measure and count the photons of light. We're almost over the science part. Next slide. Next one. What this boils down to, and there's a video of this at that address below on the bottom of the slide, this is a blepharisma. It's being exposed to a very specific frequency, and within a few minutes it basically loses structural integrity, and it literally spills its guts into the bloodstream. That's all. That debris will empty out, and of course it's dead after that. That's the type of targeting Rife was talking about. That's the type of targeting for various pathogens that is the mindset of most of the community as far as destroying certain bad things. But to energize cells, we can do the same thing. Now, next slide. I believe I also put this commercial up there for people to read. I may not have put this commercial, but I did the next one. Rife has also been compared over and over to the Ella Fitzgerald commercial, breaking the glass, singing at a very perfect pitch to break the glass. Well, even though that analogy has been used over and over, it's wrong, because people think that it vibrates the cells to death, and that's just not how this works. Next slide. And this is a video that is up there, and I would really recommend y'all watching that start to finish, because it took a sustained speed over a long period of time for the bridge to start getting upset. It kept absorbing the energy, absorbing it until it finally came apart. And you can actually see the wave on the bridge. There's an opposite wave on the other side of the bridge until it literally twisted it apart. But next slide. We have within us various mechanisms that respond to very specific wavelengths. When I saw this picture, it was one Dr. Haltwanger had at a conference, and I recognized what that was. He didn't even know what it was at the time. That's an electronic component. The interesting part about it, this is inside a cell. You can literally see the wiring between components, and it's also wired to the cell wall. This is electrical, pure, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is not only used for receiving, it's also used for storage of electrical energy. Next slide. So it's using those mechanisms that we to transmit to structures like that we we do that. This is a cancer scenario. There's other things that happen as well. In the first picture, and I believe there may or may not be a video of this. In the first one is the cancer scenario. The cells you see that glob. In the majority of that video, they're completely clustered together. The blood is moving like molasses. This is before being exposed. The person complains of being cold. They do have cancer. The blood is very, very thick. It doesn't get to the capillaries, which is why they're cold. It doesn't absorb oxygen well. Only the outside of the clusters will absorb. And it also doesn't get the nutrients and things like that. So, and the person usually just degrades and degrades. But after an exposure, you see in the background here some of the debris that you would have recognized as being spilt out from certain cells. Now, the cells that you're looking at here are regular blood cells. We're not looking at any cancer cells here. They're someplace else, but they've been affected and they spilled that debris into the system. But in this picture, even after a 1-hour exposure, the cells are loosening up. They're able to absorb oxygen, nutrients, and circulate better. The person is all of a sudden feeling better than they've ever felt in a long time. And after the next day, another exposure, you see it even looser and more regular and more healthy. But you also see more debris in the background. And that is what also gives us that Herxheimer reaction that you've likely heard of, or a toxic die-off that has to be processed through this kidneys. All of what we just talked about was electrical in nature, but things like pH. Let's, Jordy, you want to talk about pH? It's ironic that people know more about their swimming pool pH than they do the pH of their body. Do you want to talk about
True, and they'll take care of their swimming pool pH. They won't really take care of their body's pH.
Next slide. And then the next one. And then probably the next one. Okay, Jordy.
Yeah, so it's a standard testing, whether for any kind of environmental factors. It's a big environmental factor of the body, and the more voltage that you could pump into an environment, usually the higher the alkalinity will also increase. And yeah, it can be measured with those litmus paper strips, as were shown before. And yeah, mainly taking like baking soda and electrolytes and things. The electrolytes and the trace minerals and magnesium, calcium are very important, I think, for getting the charge to the cells from the plasma or the contact devices. The more alkaline creates an unstable environment for the microorganisms. Usually the microorganism-rich environment will be in an acid-rich environment, and where the acid's not present and the alkalinity is higher, you won't have a microorganism situation.
Diet especially.
Yeah.
You want to do the
So the
voltage?
idea is that
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, yeah, voltage and all these things are concerned. So you could take the supplements and you could do the baking soda, and then you could energize and take it further with the frequency technology as long as you're on the correct resonance for your body, which varies greatly from person to person because different people have different electrochemical environments, which I think beget different microorganism species and colonies. Even people that are husband and wife, spouses, they usually carry different microorganisms because they have different chemical loads, being genetically predisposed from their parents' exposure to chemicals or environmental factors and dietary factors. They carry different organisms, so the different frequencies will show up for people. But yeah, and sometimes there's like a general, you could take pH of urine or you could take the pH of the mouth. Then it's also said where you have these microbe colonies or an injury or a tumor location that will harbor a different pH level than the rest of the body as well.
Okay.
So there's local pH in general.
Yeah. pH is actually an electrical measurement. Even most doctors don't realize that, but it has to do with available electrons, and the available electrons can be provided especially via the contact devices. Next slide. And next one. The voltage, each of those cells has stored within it that we saw a voltage. And I don't agree with these numbers here. These are actually furnished by Dr. Jerry Tennant, and I don't know how he was measuring them, but I've got the voltage should run much higher numbers than this. But a cancer cell is very, very low, like 8 to 10 microvolts, whereas a healthy is 8 to even 100 microvolts. And healing is about 50, if I recall. But we are terribly electrical in nature. Next slide. And keeping that voltage up through the proper foods, exercise, all of that. I know which one of these, I mean, I'm not a female, but out of the two, I know which one I would rather be. But as the cells age, they lose their charge, and you start digressing. And next slide. Dr. Robert Becker was probably the foremost authority when he started doing the work and noticing the electrical nature of amphibians. It is because of this electrical nature that they're able to regenerate limbs. We probably would be if we were at a much higher electrical level. Next slide. Waveform is terribly important. I'm not going to go into all the reasons why, but next slide. Typically, you hear about 3 different waves: sine wave, square wave, triangle wave. We'll forget the triangle wave for a moment. We normally when we're dealing with Rife, we're talking about square wave. When we're talking about sine wave, we talk about, or brain waves, we think about sine wave. Next slide. And the reason is because of harmonics. While our equipment is able to go relatively high in frequency, not all equipment is. That doesn't mean it's not good. Something that operates with a square wave in the audio frequency, something that operates in a device such as a cell phone or a tablet, it actually can put out higher frequencies than what it's actually putting out. If you use a sine wave, this is a spectral analysis. You see the spike exactly 1,000 hertz where it's being generated. And all this other garbage is just noise. On a square wave, you actually see harmonics at every multiple there, well on up the scale. And depending on how good it is, the waveform itself is how many of those things go out there and how high a level they're at. This is an ideal situation here. A triangle just has a few close in to it. So we'll forget about triangle waves. But square waves is typically what you would use when you're trying to target other things, and especially if you don't have something that goes a high enough frequency. And when you're talking about most of the pathogens, they're actually pretty high. The next slide. The waveform, the rise time on the waveform is very important too, because this is what makes a big difference in equipment. Because if the rise time is over a certain period, I think it's 20 microseconds, the body knows how to filter it out. Have you noticed that, Jordy?
Yeah, I have noticed that.
Okay. This took me a while to figure out, but it really made us understand what was the difference in equipment that was out there. Next slide. Yeah, let's not complicate it with that one. Next slide. When it comes to equipment out there, I hope nobody has one of these that is sitting there on that table. That's not our device, but that is a very, very common device. It's been sold under dozens of different names. They keep changing the name. Next slide. This is why it's bad. The rise time that we were talking about, what the waveform should look like is in this top thing. That has an excellent rise time. As soon as that thing is connected to a person, it should ideally have something that's less than 20 microseconds. This has a rise time of over 750 microseconds. In other words, your body will immediately recognize that as a foreign signal and start changing things up. Next slide. So I use that device as a good example of a bad example. One of the things that's really important that very few, and that what Jordy was talking about earlier, is we're one of the few companies that is actually doing biological work as well to test against, and like Rife was doing, going out and trying to figure out the mortal oscillatory rates of some of these pathogens. And in this case, we're working with 3 worst-case strains of MRSA. There is no antibiotics for these. These came from 3 different labs. They are deadly. There is no antibiotics that work on them. And they've become resistant to virtually all antibiotics. The only solution in the future is going to be electronic. Next slide, and then next slide. Next slide. There we go. Actually, previous one. Our simplest device is a glorified frequency generator. It's more than frequency because it's actually called a function generator, because we're able to do a lot of different things with the waveform. It's done to be a very simple device, no controls on it whatsoever. Everything is done from the computer. This is more than what a lot of people. This is probably the next level that a person gets into. Don't let the small size fool you. I use this device more often than I use our $10,000 device. This I will use on myself to get rid of a flu in about 45 minutes to 2 hours. That's after I have a full-fledged case of the flu. viruses seem to be pretty weak. Next slide. More like what Rife was doing was the use of plasma devices. And here you see a device being run from a frequency generator, still again with the exact same software. It's just that you're activating and deactivating the plasma. Next slide. We have the same thing with that frequency generator built in. It's quite frankly, it's a good device, but I like the separate devices because I can grab that device, the contact version, and take it with me. It has the output for both devices. And then the next slide. This is our premium device. This is primarily for serious researchers and practitioners, and it's got everything built into it. There'll be other slides on that. And then just for the final slide of that is the Rife station. Is something that we did for research. On the next slide. This is a system that we used to actually put the plasma device right over the subject we were looking at, and this was donated to a clinic in Craiova, Romania. They were actually the ones that did a lot of our biological research that you'll see some slides on. Do you want to add something on the equipment? Go to the next, skip that's one, and go to the next one. You want to talk about the equipment and the software, Jordy?
Yeah. Well, with devices I've used in the past, they require their own special box. You have to have it positioned right in there, and you have to treat it like it's a bunch of glass. Whereas with Jimmie's, the P3 Pro seems to be built like a tank, and has, I don't know, some kind of stabilization mechanisms in it. I don't know all of what he does, but I've never broken one, and mine gets traveled daily, and sometimes more than daily. And for years, I've never had a problem with any of them, which is so unlike other equipment that I've worked with in the past. So, being a practitioner and doing this for a living, I don't have to worry about the equipment breaking or just not working whatsoever. Sometimes I'll have a PFG running into the silver generator, which Jimmie hasn't talked about yet, but imprinting specific frequencies into colloidal silver that have also come up on biofeedback. At the same time, I'm running the biofeedback frequencies off of the P3 Pro. I do also have P3 that connects to the P3 Pro, so you get two plasmas going there at the same time. I've noticed some interesting effects, to say the least, with those two systems hooked up together. The P3 is also, it's a good sturdy device, but it's not something I carry around with me every day. But a great home unit nonetheless. And the PFG is the best for travel. I mean, sometimes I've had two of those things going, and if you were to do several people at the same time, it would generally be one plasma, and up to 3 PFGs or something, or whatever you can handle. But they all run off of the same software, which is nice, so I don't have to have separate programs, and they all run right now just about the same range and frequency. So I don't have to rewrite programs based on the device. Sometimes I might change the waveform around a little bit, but generally I stick to square on that. The software that Jimmie has come out with is very intuitive. So where you can just search the part of a name of a microbe or a part of a name of a system process in the body and be able to pull it up. I've got I've had, I think, up to like 4 or 5 different frequency libraries. So you'd have like the CAFL, and the thousand or so programs there, higher converted frequency CAFL. And when you're working, in the low ultrasound range of that library, you're a little bit closer to the target frequencies. And then there's the private libraries, which are oh so important. And I don't use the CAFL hardly ever, and there's just a few frequencies that I've taken from those lists to add into the biofeedback software, but I just find that the frequencies that Jimmie's come up with that are inside the software in this are the ones that I go to immediately.
Let's get through a couple more slides and open it up for questions. We only got a couple more. Yeah. This is some of the work that was being done in Romania, where she's actually validating. We're actually working on the Candida documents. Next slide. We actually, each one of those little pie sections was a separate exposure. Every frequency that was in every RIFE list we used and found most of them almost worthless. With a few exceptions, we calculated the numbers out and came up with an excellent protocol. Next slide. Working with a practitioner is incredibly important. Jordy is way too modest. We couldn't do our work were it not for the practitioner, but having the practitioner recognize certain deficiencies you may be going through that you're not educated enough to necessarily know. An outside person that is trained can oftentimes see it and give you the guidance you need. We also rely on the practitioners to distribute our private protocols, the ones that Jordy says work so much better than the public ones. Next slide, and then next one. But typically the practitioner assesses something, helps them with their protocol. If you notice that software was particularly branded to a particular practitioner, they also have place within our software to give specific instructions. Next, this slide just shows a simple contact. This slide shows receiving a simple session. It's easy enough to do. Shouldn't be take that much out of your day. You can do it while you're reading, watching TV, working on the computer, whatever. And this is the tethered one.
Because they use the TENS unit pads, it leaves you hands-free.
Yeah, he has them on his wrist here. If there was more than one person, the plasma becomes the better solution. You typically can walk around throughout your house, even if you have a pretty large house. Next slide. Again, I wanted to remind you all about all these extra papers. And there's literally thousands of pages up at Pulse Tech Research, but a lot of good stuff also at the Quantum Life thing. And there'll be new stuff there for next week. Next slide. We're continuing to work on the next slide. And then the next one. And the next one. And y'all got to remember, this is not conventional. We've done some remarkable work with arthritis. We're working on Lyme. Cancer, cancer isn't a problem to me. I'm not worried about cancer at all. Or arthritis. I have a touch of diabetes because I haven't been taking care of myself. Jordy will be going through most of these next week. Each of these is different segments of the next week's, where we actually get into some of the specifics, and that presentation's a lot prettier to look at than this one. Next slide. The brain aspects are what has really interested me the most, and how we're dealing with it and the relationship of this with the mind-body-spirit examples. There is down-to-earth science embedded in it. That's going to be real important for next week. Can we open it up for questions now?
Yes.
And I hope most of them are for Jordy, because he's the one that actually has most of the answers. I'm just techie.
Okay.
When it comes to practical, he's much better.
Okay, so they're starting to come in. All right. So what I want a couple of you to know, if you're not getting these slides properly, and there's a lot of latency or drag time, you have to be on a fast internet speed in order to watch this. But this is being recorded, and it will be on the Quantum Life training site, and they probably will put it on YouTube so you can go watch it at another time. So that addresses the first ones that we were seeing here. Okay, so can your devices deliver frequencies to a person remotely, such as can reportedly be done with something like the F165/SC1 or Spooky 2?
I'm familiar with those devices. The F165, the Altair Robin unit, is just a function generator. Now,
the Spooky 2, the one that I looked at was like a 5-volt signal generator, and the person that was working with that practitioner set up a generalized protocol that ran 11 hours. They didn't talk about any remote capabilities, and they took them off the PFG, and the result to the client was a loss of 80 pounds. I'd say a loss of 50% of the hair, and that which was left was all gray. Giant lipomas, maybe 20 or 30 of them over her body. I mean, I've not to say that that's from a device, or I just know that they were using that when that happened. And but to specifically talk about the remote stuff, I've had someone try it out and they believed it was effective, but I don't know how that happens, or don't like to advertise. That's why the only thing remote that we do is the hand cradle is at someone else's location, but it's physically doing the same thing. It's just where my software is controlling their hardware through the internet and telling it what signals to put in, and then they're running it through their own devices. But no, I don't generally think this is for sending frequencies around the world.
That's not our intent.
Okay. So how would the Zyto Select compare with the Elite? I've been using Select and just discovered the output feature. I want to become better at using it.
Well, the Elite is the one that you have the ability to import your own items into it. So Zyto's frequency, and I have videos on this, they generally go 1 to 1,000, and then there's common frequencies, which might be another 150 or so. And you have like Abrams channels and things like that, and then you might have a list of tops like 1,500 frequencies. But what I've done is most of like maybe 5,000 or 6,000 of the frequencies are based on Jimmie's, and the slide that he didn't want to go over with frequency steps and sweeps that cover mutations that happen after you run a frequency. Things will slightly change. So a list of 500 or 600 frequencies becomes 6,000 that need to be checked around, and that's not even probably a complete picture of what you need, but it's more specific than anything I've seen out there. So the ability to imprint is the answer between the Select and the Elite.
Okay.
So my custom frequency library contains 12 or 13,000 frequencies extra from what Zyto had in it.
Got it. Okay. Someone here says they joined late. And how much is the device?
Oh, our devices?
Yes.
They range in price from $19.95 to like just under 2,000 to just under 10,000, depending on what device it is.
And what's the distinction between the inexpensive one all the way up to the one that's almost 10,000?
The one that you saw in the picture where the guy was sitting with the computer over there, the device sitting with it, it's contact, but it allows you to add the plasma later. And that's what most people, when they come to us, by the time they come to us, they've already been through the mill, they've had other equipment, it didn't work, and they come to us expecting to have to buy a plasma unit. And I'd say 75% of the time, I end up telling them they don't need a plasma unit, they need a contact unit that works well, that works properly, that has some of those waveform characteristics that don't get filtered out by the body. And by doing that, the contact device works great. And if in Lyme, for instance, the contact device is what I would recommend, but we're finding more times than not, it isn't one person in the family that has Lyme. It's most or all of them, eventually all of them. And in that case, a plasma unit becomes really the only solution for them. Or somebody that just likes to be mobile and doesn't mind paying the extra money for a plasma unit. So the $10,000 unit is primarily for practitioners, and specifically practitioners that do house calls. And I'm sorry, that wasn't near the microphone.
Right.
Practitioners that do house calls. I didn't know there were so many. There are a lot.
Yes. Okay, so.
Yeah, the $10,000 one allows you to do the contact and plasma. So if you just wanted to get one for some reason, but like Jimmie was saying, you could get the PFG, you could have the P3 attached to it. If you need to travel, you just take the PFG off of it, and then less packing room and all that, but you still are taking a great device.
This is why we like to work with the practitioners, because they really are the best ones at helping their client assess what their needs really are. Not what the client thinks they need, but what they really are.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's so true with what they think they have in their body versus what shows up on their scans.
Okay. So we have another question here. It says, is the Holman.net/pub/quantum life site working, or did they copy it wrong?
I hope they didn't copy it wrong.
It's working.
Yeah.
It is working?
It is working, yeah.
Okay, would you give that, I don't remember which slide that was to flip back to it.
It's got to be a capital Q and a capital L.
That's what they didn't do. I'll bet you. Okay, great. And we have one last here.
And I will be leaving that up for a month or so. That's my private server.
Okay. So it says, thank you both very much for sharing your valuable knowledge with us tonight. We're excited to learn more next Thursday. And thank you for Suzan for interviewing these two amazing and very talented men. I agree. Totally. Okay. So
I think you're going to be amazed next week when Jordy goes through all of these things. It's going to be fun.
Well, everybody's rushing in at the last minute now. Okay, so we are going to go a little bit over because I think it's important to get these questions answered. We only have like 3 or 4 that rushed in here. Okay, with Lyme, are you saying that the bacteria is contagious between family members?
Despite what CDC is telling people, it appears absolutely yes. They're getting it out of teardrops and body fluids. I don't care what the CDC says. I've talked to doctor after doctor that says otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so in other words, it's not official, but it seems to be the case.
Got it. I would say that's probably pretty accurate from what I've observed. Okay, so she's got it. It was the capital cube missing. I own the PFG2Z and like your products, but I found that when using that model, there was a shock between each frequency change that was uncomfortable. Is there a reason this occurs, and can it be avoided?
Yes. When that happens, she needs to talk to Paul and get it replaced. There was some chips that we were overdriving, and when they failed, they just failed in a manner that they still seem to work, but they did that that's easy fix. It takes about 45 minutes to do it.
Got it. Okay. So I'm glad you brought that up.
I am too. It was just one of those things. We got a batch of chips from a manufacturer that actually it comes to turn out that there may not even been what they were marked as. But we did see that problem, and we took care of it real quick.
Okay.
And it's just a matter of getting it swapped out. We usually do when something like that comes in. It probably has been upgraded. We will upgrade it to a new unit.
Got it. Okay. And do you have a list of practitioners that work with you that do house calls?
I wish I could. I wish I could publicly list it. We're actually trying to put together a referral list. Many of the doctors that do that, they're already full up. A lot of there's so many doctors that are doing research. And many of believe it or not, I was surprised at how many MDs have our equipment, and they don't necessarily want to do it openly. But when it comes to treating themselves, their family, or their parents, we're usually their first choice. We do have certain practitioners in certain places, but we haven't published a public list. If they call Paul at our regular Pulse Tech number, which I haven't even given out that website, our equipment is at pulsetech.com, PULSEDTECH. There may be a link from the Pulse Tech Research website, but he can actually, in certain areas we do have practitioners that we refer to.
Okay, so they could contact.
Where they were, yeah.
Okay. And so it says, I'm glad I was able to hear the guest tonight. This is so important and interesting. And it's true. So why don't you both give contact information, if you like, so that people can move forward with you?
Okay. Jordy?
Yeah, my email is Jordan DeJonge, JORDANDEJONGE @hotmail.com. On Twitter, I'm RIFE, 4 LYME.com. And YouTube, I'm at Ondamed Jedi, ONDAMEDJEDI, and phone number is 616-460-9038.
Great. And
Jimmie? I'm Jimmie Holman at Pulse Technologies. The number is 214-453-0095 or 66. My email is Jimmie, JIMMIE, at pulsetech.com. It's PULSEDTECH.com.
Beautiful. Okay, well, everybody, this has been wonderful. I want to thank both of you also on behalf of our audience. I know with some of these remarks and so on, they're grateful that, we have spent the evening together and grateful that it's being recorded. And we look forward to being with you again on part 2 next week for these protocol topics, which look wonderful and important for us to know about. So thank you very much. And on behalf of Quantum Life and myself, we thank you, and we're going to say good night. Unless you have something, anything to add, okay?
It was a pleasure.
Okay, it was over here too, and for everybody else. Thank you now.